The ESG Disclosure Judgement Handbook has been developed within the Redefining Value programme, which is circled in pink on your slide. So the next slide tells us a bit more about the Redefining Value programme, which operates across 3 programme areas: business decision making, which includes work on enterprise risk management, integrated performance management, measurement and valuation, governance and internal insight. There's also an investor decision making programme. And the work on the Judgement Handbook has been conducted within the External Disclosure Programme area. So if we move to the next slide, you'll see there that the Purpose-Driven Disclosure Project is just one of the activities within our External Disclosure Project. We also work on assurance and controls, the TCFD, and we have our flagship Reporting Matters survey annually of WBCSD members' reporting activity, and the reporting exchange, about which I'll talk more in a moment. But the Judgement Handbook falls within purpose-driven disclosure. So that project is designed to help companies disclose relevant, decision-useful information to encourage the flow of financial capital to more sustainable companies and outcomes. So we work to assist in the decision-making and actions by companies that are then reflected in their external disclosures that can inform particularly investors and financial market participants in their decision-making and actions to support sustainable outcomes. So our focus really is on aspects of ESG reporting as they affect investor decision-making, and certainly from a financial viewpoint. So on the next slide, let's think about why we did this project. Why did we look at judgment? Why did we think it was a good topic to focus on? Well, basically, because there are so many options and possibilities for preparing ESG information. We know that because we have a product I hope many of you will have seen and registered for, called the Reporting Exchange. The Reporting Exchange tracks and monitors and records information about reporting provisions that directly or indirectly affect the way in which companies prepare their ESG information in corporate reports. We've looked at provisions that apply in 63 countries, and we found over 1,800 reporting provisions, including 188 voluntary reporting frameworks. These reporting provisions originate from a number of different sources, as shown in the icons that you can see on the slide there, from various voluntary organisations and international organisations that develop reporting provisions. Now, those provisions include requirements, that is, requirements advising companies that they should report something and what that reporting should include. They include reporting resources, which are more about how you prepare and present information. And they include management resources that are more about the behavioural aspects of embedding ESG into your organisation. Now, although some say that this presents a confused and complex landscape, by categorising and recording these provisions, we can see some patterns in the requirements. And that's what the Judgement Handbook is partly designed to do, to help us see those patterns, to inform our judgments about what type of ESG information to report. If you have the handbook, it's worth having a look at some point at page 11 under the title, What ESG Should Be Reported, because you'll see there that we've provided a brief summary of where we see coalescence in the type of ESG information that's being required, requested, and reported. There's also evidence of coalescence through the Corporate Reporting Dialogues Better Alignment Programme. So that's all encouraging news. But in the meantime, if we move to slide 8, we'll see that, let's have a look at the current state of ESG type disclosure. There's lots of activity, lots of improvement, effort, and increasing take-up of ESG reporting. But there are lots of gaps. There are gaps in the quality and quantity of information, and so many reports that say things like there's too much information, there's too little, it's too boilerplate, it's inconsistent and incomparable, and so many surveys that say very much the same, such as an HSBC survey in 2017 that said that 56% of investors find current levels of ESG disclosure as highly inadequate. There are gaps in the perspectives between investors and companies. So a PwC survey in 2016 found that only 29% of investors regard ESG information as being of high quality, whereas 100% of companies regard it as high quality. So you can see there's a gap there. There are gaps also between the development of ESG information primarily as a voluntary practice over very many years and the fairly recent involvement of authorities and central bankers such as the Financial Stability Board and the EU. So we're seeing more regulatory involvement. There are gaps between paper-based reporting and the increasing use of technology, such as the use of textual analysis and artificial intelligence and scraping information by machines to reach conclusions about a company's ESG performance. And what this amounts to is a trust gap. And there's a report that's been put out by the IASB's Investors in Financial Reporting Programme saying how much high quality and transparent reporting is fundamental to building trust in capital markets and to making decisions. It's not all bad news. There are some possible solutions emerging, and we'll talk a bit about those. But what do you do in the meantime? That takes us to the next slide. Well, with so many possibilities, so many choices, so much criticism, so many gaps in people's perceptions of reporting, it can result in what some people call analysis paralysis. Now, what companies seem to do in practice is to gather all the information they can, which is perfectly understandable. And therefore, we get this volume and so-called clutter in reporting. Companies might prepare multiple reports aimed at different subjects or integrated reports, or take hybrid approaches. They're all legitimate responses to so much choice, but it's important to invest in judgment as part of your process for ESG reporting in order to prevent risk and maximize opportunity. If your ESG information is regarded as unsatisfactory, it can give rise to risks associated with failure to satisfy your stakeholders' information needs, perceptions of lack of accountability, failure to conduct fiduciary duty, disconnects between information reported through different channels, failure to comply with risk regimes, and so on. And also there's an opportunity to getting it right through the application of judgment. And that is, based on the numerous studies that show that proper management of long-term ESG factors add to better performance and stock and financial returns. So we're just going to pause for a moment there and ask you a question about what do you think about the range of possibilities in the landscape. Now, do you think, and you can choose one or more of these, there's too much choice and too much to do? Is your response to this to produce multiple reports and to complete multiple questionnaires? Do you deal in your own way with the choices? Have you developed your own approach to these conundrums? Do you try to bring everything together into an integrated report, or do you just stick with chosen frameworks such as CDP and GRI and so on that you choose to respond to? So let's take the vote now. Now, here we have the results. There's, yes, 35% of people agree there's too much to do. 47% produce multiple reports. Nobody has said that they've developed their own approach. 24% bring it together in integrated reporting, and 47% stick to chosen frameworks. So we can see there's a range of responses there. That's very interesting for our research. Thank you very much for participating in the poll. So if we move to the next slide, we're going to look at the Judgement Handbook now. And look at why we did it. What's it designed to do? It's really designed to help you navigate and negotiate between these choices. You have to navigate the information needs of multiple stakeholders. There are multiple reporting provisions. You'll have your own internal objectives within a company for reporting. You might want to help to satisfy external objectives for reporting, such as commitments to the SDGs. It helps you to respond to concerns about volume and clutter and to avoid the dangers of boilerplate reporting. So let's have a look on the next slide about what is judgment. Well, judgment is part of decision making. It's a preparation for decision making. There's been so much written about decision making recently. I'm sure you've seen the popular science books that tell us to think fast in a blink, think twice, or think fast and slow. Some of the academic literature says that one of the ways to deal with decision making and judgment is to widen our options, reality test our assumptions, get some distance between our, between our decision making, see it through other people's eyes, and prepare to be wrong. So what judgment does is that it helps you form independent and unbiased views, to be comprehensive in fact-gathering activity, help you evaluate your options, have fewer errors and risks, to improve the quality of reporting, importantly, to support any assurance that you wish to obtain over your information, raise confidence in it, enhance coherence between information reported in different places, and to explain to the users of your information how you have reached decisions. So it helps you explore these various options associated with judgment and to take control of your narrative. It can also be used to help with sign-off, and importantly, to act as a bridge between all the information you hold in-house, your internal procedures, and to use the judgment process to synthesize that internal information into an external disclosure. I'd just like to say at this point that we got to the Judgement Handbook through collaboration and previous work on materiality with partners at the University of Yale, at Ceres, at GRI, and with others. So I'd just like to thank them for their work in helping us get to this stage. So let's look now at what's in the handbook. Let's dive right into it. Now, I want to start by saying that this is quite a simple process. The handbook is quite short. It's only 26 odd pages. The whole process is summed up on page 5 in one page, and there's a checklist on pages 25 and 26. So don't think we're doing something terribly complicated here. It's just a way of summarizing thinking on judgment that we hope will help you. So there are 4 things really in this judgment handbook. There's some advice on preparatory steps to take before you enter your sort of judgment phase. And those preparatory steps are about understanding your external context in which you operate, your risks, your internal objectives, and your processes and practices. Now, if you need help on that, the Redefining Value program can also offer help through our enterprise risk management projects, measurement and valuation, and integrated performance management work. So that's the first thing, preparatory steps. Next, as you see on this slide, there are some key questions, 6 key questions that inform judgment. They are: why should we report? For whom should we report? What to report? How to report? How much to report? And where should we report? So these are the key questions. There are also process steps for exercising judgment that we'll come on to, and 2 overarching considerations that are shown on the right-hand side of your screen, being the application of reporting principles, including materiality, and the understanding of user needs. The other important thing to say about what you have in this handbook is examples. There are lots of examples and links to those examples about how companies and others have addressed these questions, have exercised a process of judgment, and what they have disclosed about it. Again, I want to stress that at the moment the judgment handbook is in draft form. It's a consultation document. We're not claiming to have a perfect answer, and we really do invite your feedback on these proposals we're making about the exercise of judgment. So if we move to the next slide, please, we'll just have a quick look at the process. So we've got our preparatory steps, we've got our questions. This is the process. The process involves 4 steps, which is to identify the universe of possibilities for your reporting. Now, step A will be satisfied if you work your way through the 6 questions. So they're sort of tied up together, the questions and the way in which you identify all the possibilities that you can consider. Step B is to evaluate your different possibilities. Now, evaluation is conducted by suggested 5 tests about whether what you've seen in the universe of possibilities supports your objectives and the purpose of your reporting, has business value to you as a company, meets the needs of your intended audience, is supportable and useful, and can be clearly communicated. Step C is about deciding what to do based on that evaluation. Now, whereas step B is neutral, objective, and an evidence-based procedure that relies on tests, step C is more subjective, and it relies on the assumptions, opinions, and wisdom of management and experts. And step D is to document what you've decided, together with any sensitivities and uncertainties. So we're going to come back to the process, but I just want to look at the questions, the key questions in a bit more detail, so you know what's in this handbook. So let's look at the first question. Why should we report? Well, fundamentally, it boils down to 3 things, we think. Because you have to, because there are some compliance requirements. Because you want to, because there are things you as a company want to report to your stakeholders. Or because you feel you ought to, in order to comply with peer practice, or because you want to show that you're committed to and contributing to policy goals. So when we talk about compliance, just to make it clear, we're not talking about compliance requirements that are very prescriptive, because no judgment is required there. You just basically have to do what you're told. We're talking about non-prescriptive mandatory reporting requirements where companies are asked to do something, for example, with the EU, to put within the management report a non-financial statement containing information about environmental, social, employee and human rights issues. But the point is there, you have discretion about how you respond to that. Now you'll see on the table that we have summarised, and this is a pattern we follow in the Judgment Handbook, we've summarised possibilities for you. So you might want to report as shown in the left-hand column of the table, to satisfy compliance requirements, or to communicate progress against your own commitments and strategic aims, to describe how the company creates value, to report on your contribution to international commitments such as the SDGs, because you want to align with peer practice, participate in ratings and indices, or respond to stakeholders, NGOs and societal expectations. Now in the right-hand column, you'll see that we provide links to examples of how companies have responded to those types of reasons for reporting. It's important to say that your reason for reporting can actually influence what you report and how you report it. For example, if you're satisfying compliance requirements, you're more likely to want to get verification or assurance over that. So the quality and auditability, if you like, of auditability of the information is likely to be more important than if you just want to describe how you're creating value, which is more determined by management. So that's the why question. Let's look at the next slide at the for whom question. Well, this question can be answered by considering what your relationship is with your different stakeholder groups. For example, do you have some responsibility to them through legal, financial, or operational routes because of contracts, policies, and otherwise? Are you, is your relationship with the stakeholder group one of influence, where your partners are able to help you to achieve your goals and vice versa? Is the relationship important because you have the most interaction with those stakeholders and their long-standing relationships? Or is the stakeholder group one of dependency, mutual dependency with employees, those for whom you're dependent for safety, livelihood, health and welfare? Or is it a question of representation through unions and membership organisations? So you'll see that we've tried to summarise the universe of possibilities about for whom you might want to report. There are some really good examples on page 10 of the handbook about how BHP Billiton, BMW and DSM have explained their audiences and groupings. You'll also see on page 11 that we refer to what academics and others have written about dealing with the different audiences for whom you might want to report. So there's the Bob Eccles Harvard suggestions on making a statement of significant audiences and work on core or more. So let's now look at the what to report question. Now this is the question about which we've written the most. This extends over some pages. Now, as I said earlier, if you want to think about what you can report and understand the universe of possibilities, have a look at the reporting exchange. We provide a link to that on page 11 of the Judgment Handbook, so you can see the types of subject matter that are possible. Often we can see that the content categories are pretty much the same between many requestors of information, that they'll say that the type of information they want falls in the categories of strategy, risk, governance, performance, and metrics. There's quite a common thread there. However, what you report is also influenced by the perspective from which information is reported. And you'll see in the diagram there an extract from the SDG compass that explains the difference between an outside-in approach that talks about the effect of actual and expected ESG developments to do with policy, technology, market dynamics, and resource depletion on the business. So outside in is how do outside things affect the business inside? And inside out, about the effect that the reporting company expects to have on the environment, communities, markets, and future generations. So the type of information reported in each case might be different, because in the outside-in case, companies are likely to have more knowledge and control over the information because it's a bit more observable and measurable inside the organisation, and the reverse applies inside out. The other thing you might want to think about when considering what to report is the type of information you report, and whether it's operational, which will involve measurements and actual processes and procedures, or analytical, where you're seeking to assess and analyse strategic and business financial implications of ESG matters, or whether it's forward-looking, so that you're trying to provide some insight into the future activity of the business. The penultimate consideration is the type of indicator. What are you doing this for? What's the indicator designed to do for the audience? Is it designed to provide evidence, to explain something, to describe something, or to provide a measure of absolute or integrated performance? Again, we've got loads of examples in the handbook about the way in which companies use indicator types, and you'll see that on pages 12 and 13. Now, we're conscious that all of this, lists of things, categories of things, can seem a bit complicated, and we're working on in our future work on trying to simplify that. So we think tentatively that these information types can be mapped to the main purposes for which information is designed. And they include integration, to show that you've integrated ESG into your corporate policies and processes, such as risk management and governance. Operation, and that reflects the tangible, visible, observable, measurable results of your operation. Mitigation, that's information that's designed to show what actions, plans, strategies, and performance indicators you use to mitigate key ESG risks. Adaptation, to show that you're ready to adapt to the risks that you have identified from an ESG perspective. Transition, that's information that explains your response to the transition to a low carbon, no plastic, SDG and Paris Agreement world. And finally, transformation, to help explain the company's plans for success beyond transition. So that's something we're working on to complement the ESG Judgement Handbook over time, and we hope that you'll help us with it. Let's move then to the final question that we're dealing with. We've combined two, how and how much. Well, the question of how refers to how do you prepare and present something? What methodology, calculation approach, guidance should you use? And there's quite a lot available. Do you use a recognized methodology, an in-house design? And the question of how you prepare the information is again linked to the other questions about for whom. So that's how, how do you prepare and present it? What methodology do you use? And how do you avoid boilerplate reporting and be careful of commercial sensitivities? Now, how much and how much is also determined by the types of reporting principles that many of the standard setters and framework developers produce. So you'll see that we've tried to summarize them for you in the table on the slide. You can see that there's quite a lot of similarity between the types of principles that these different framework providers prescribe, but these are sort of, if you like, acid tests and watchwords that help you decide how and how much to report. So actually the final question is where, and we've got that next. This is a bit simpler. I'm sure you'll all recognize in the left-hand column the different routes through which information can be reported: a mainstream report, an integrated report, sustainability report, your website, management presentations, in speeches and videos. And again, you'll see on the right-hand side, we've given you some examples of how different companies approach that, and I really encourage you to look at the examples. So at this point, webinar participants, we've been through all the key questions, and we'd like to turn a question to you, please. And the question is, which questions from that set of 6 present most challenges for you? You can choose up to 2, or you can select all of them. So the polling will now begin. Which question is the most? Oh, nobody's chosen all of them, which is good, very good news. For whom, 21%, why, 26%, what, 42%, how, 47%, where, 5%, how much, 50%. Oh, so how much is clearly the most difficult question, followed by how do we do it and what do we report? Thank you very much for those very helpful results. We're going to come on to how much when we look at materiality in a moment. So thank you for those polling results. Now, you've seen this slide before. Just to take you back to process, just as a reminder. So we've completed step A by working through the questions and looking at the universe of possibilities. Now in step B, we evaluate which of those possibilities works best for us as companies by applying these tests, which is most appropriate to support our objectives and the purpose of our reporting, which has the most business value for us, which meets the needs of our audience, is supportable and useful and can be clearly communicated. And then you move on to the more subjective decision making and documentation. But since 58% of our participants chose how much as the most difficult question that you have to deal with, let's take a look at materiality. Now, no conversation about ESG reporting will ever avoid the thorny question of materiality. We don't deal with materiality in great detail in the Judgement Handbook. There's a chapter on materiality, but it's really designed to look at the role of materiality in the exercise of judgment. That chapter is chapter 4 that starts on page 18. Now, in our work at WBCSD, our 2017 reporting matters exercise found that only 37% of WBCSD members aligned the content of their reporting to the outcomes of their materiality assessment. So this suggests a lack of connectivity between materiality assessments and reporting content, and only 29% of material sustainability issues were included in sustainability reports were also included in the risk section of the annual report. So you can see why this type of disconnect might call into question the quality and credibility of reporting in some cases. So it's important to get materiality right. Now, what we've done is just try to simplify some of the guidance that we see to help with materiality determinations. And we're certainly open to, doing more work on materiality subject to your feedback on the Judgement Handbook. As I said, we're specifically looking at the role it plays in making judgments. So our first suggestion is take account of what guidance, definitions and prescriptions about materiality you see in the standards, frameworks and resources that you use to prepare your corporate reports. Then prioritize information that could influence the decisions made by the primary intended audience, i.e. the audience you have identified through answering the for whom question. Then prioritize information that's important to management in managing the business and assessing how ESG affects the company's strategy and performance. Many investors say that what they want to understand from external reports is how management is running the business. So this is an important consideration in materiality. And thirdly, prioritize information that promotes an understanding of how the company's financial and operational performance and strategic objectives are dependent on ESG resources and relationships. Third, there's lots of different guidance on how to assess the potential magnitude, likelihood and impact of issues that have been identified through step B, the evaluation process, in order to determine whether they are or they're likely to be material. Fourth, assess these interconnections between the relevant issues and how they influence and amplify each other. See whether your understanding of the materiality of an issue is consistent with the audience understanding, and assess the interactions of material issues between the company's strategy, risks and opportunities. And finally, prioritize issues that are specific to the reporting organisation, not just general, not boilerplate, but actually affect your organisation. Now, that's one, as we said before, materiality falls into one of the overarching ways in which you exercise judgment. It's one of the reporting principles that most framework providers prescribe. The other overarching principle is to take account of your user perspectives. Now, here I want to thank very much our colleagues at KPMG who did an exercise with investors to determine what the users really want. Now, there is some confusion about this, and even a report from the Global Investor Organizations on Corporate ESG Reporting admit that an inhibiting factor in the progress of ESG reporting might be the mixed signals that many investors are sending about their ESG preferences. So we can't promise to have cut through that completely in the research that we've done, but what we've heard from investors is that they want disclosures to be aligned with what is material for the intended user. We spoke about that on the previous slide. They want to know what management thinks are the strategic and financial impacts of ESG matters, a connection to the financial impacts of ESG matters. And that if we think about for whom and where, that information is not information destined for an investor, is not obscured by information that is intended for a wider audience. Second, the investors love the forward-looking information. They like descriptions of and insights into future risks and opportunities, how resilient and adaptable the company is to that, and whether scenarios have been used to consider what could happen in the future. Of course, the investors and others like comparability, and that comes from standardization. So they support the use of standards and actually for companies to say which standards they've used. The investors like timely information in universal format so that they can put that information into their decision making. And they support the use of internal controls, verification processes, and assurance to improve reliability and build trust in information. So that's the user perspective. Now we're going to ask you, we've been through the overarching considerations in judgment, the principles and user perspectives. We've been through the questions, the key 6 questions, and we've been through the process. So our last question for you, we want to get some feeling from you about where you think this ESG Disclosure Judgement Handbook is most useful. What's it most useful for? So please tick all that are appropriate. Is it most useful for internal sign-off because you're actually able to tell those charged with governance in the companies that are signing off these reports how judgment has been exercised? Is it most useful for assurance, the preparation you do before you seek assurance? Is it useful for streamlining internal processes so that you have a set structured judgment process? Is it useful for describing your approach in the reports? You can just point to, well, we've used the ESG Disclosure Judgement Handbook. Or is it useful for taking control of your narrative and reporting choices? Please make your selections now. You can choose multiple answers. Here we have the results. What's it most useful for? Streamlining internal processes, 44, describing approach 19. Oh, that's really good. Taking control of your narrative and reporting choices. That's exactly what we want this handbook to do. So it's fabulous that you've given us that is the right answer. So thank you very much indeed. So we're nearly at the end of the webinar now. I just want to say a little bit about our next steps. We hope to get feedback from you on the draft handbook, and we'll show you in a moment how you can do that. So we will be producing a final version of the handbook next year. We're also working on something called the ESG Indicator Library. Now, this is a subset and hosted on the Reporting Exchange, where we hope to lead you more easily to the quantitative types of information that can be reported, because we know that investors have a particular interest in that. So keep an eye out for the ESG Indicator Library, which we will release next year. And thirdly, we're working on how to translate all of this judgment process and decision making into techniques that you use for reporting. And that might include something I described earlier about how to categorize information smartly, make it more aligned with mainstream reports and financial reporting. So these are things we're going to be working with over the next year or so. And please let us know if you have comments or you'd like to participate. So I think the next slide asks, have you got any questions? And here I prevail upon my colleague Luke Blower to say if there are any questions. I think we'll have a minute to answer one or two.
So we do have a couple of questions here. One participant sharing that they offer advice to a number of different companies, and they're keen to learn how the handbook could be used to help companies in their reporting cycles and processes, and gain some insights. Thank you for your question. That's really good suggestion and helpful. Something we should explore. To admit that I think to date we've been focusing on preparing the content, but definitely something we should think about. And maybe there's some sort of training that could be developed as a sort of package to sit alongside this, and a workshop that could be delivered to enable the handbook to be used as a resource to support companies through consultants' engagements, if you think that's of interest. There's also a question on when can we see the indicator library and the beta version available. I'm actually just going to try and share my screen to show you now the indicator library as is in its beta version on the Reporting Exchange. So for those who are familiar with the Reporting Exchange, you'll know there's search functionality on there, and you can search by organizations, provisions, ranking and ratings, and there's now this beta version of indicators library. So this has got a kind of partial sample set of our research to date, and again, thank you to KPMG for their leadership and efforts on the research side. So I've just here searched water at the top, and then is a range of indicators related to water. Let's just go for a super simple one, water use. And you can see that this has come from the CDP questionnaire, come from CDSB, applicable to multiple sectors, unit, liters or meters cubed. We say it's an indicator, it sits within our subject structure of environment and water use, and there you have the detailed indicator. Now on some other indicators you get more detailed breakdown of segmentation, and you'll get sector specificity, but this is clearly a more general purpose indicator. So this is currently available, and we have a closed pilot currently underway. So if you're interested in exploring some of this content on the Reporting Exchange, please do get in touch with us, and we can hopefully provide some access to you, and you can help us with some feedback. The final version of this, with a more complete data set and improved functionality, will be launched in Q1 of next year. That date to be decided, but yeah, that's what we're working towards. And then the other question was on how can we provide feedback on the handbook. Super simple, but maybe it's a little hidden on the WBCSD website. So here I am on the WBCSD website. I'm then going to go into the purpose-driven disclosure project here, and scroll down, out for consultation, the handbook that Lois has just described today. And on this page here, there is an email address, purpose-driven disclosure at wbcsd.org, and there's also a survey link that will take you to the Get Feedback site, where there's a couple of questions for you to run through, and we really appreciate your thoughts. So that's yeah, just a quick run through on questions so far. Thank you very much. So I'm actually going to continue and just finish off. This is exactly what I've just shown you on the consultation, how to get engaged, fill out the survey, get in touch with us if you'd like to speak with us, and please do read through and provide your thoughts, perspectives. And that brings us to the end of our webinar today. Just want to say thank you ever so much to everyone for joining, and for your participation and your interest and your questions. And we look forward to seeing you again soon on WBCSD webinars in the new year. Thanks and goodbye.